One problem facing people at many levels of business is how to make time for a work life and a personal life. Do you find that one seems to keep getting in the way of the other? This is the Work-Life Balance with Rick Morris. Even if you're not involved in the business world, you'll have a lot to gain by tuning in to today's show. Now, here is your host, Rick Morris.
And welcome to another edition of the Work-Life Balance this Friday afternoon. We're so excited to have everybody along with us. We're going to have a great show. It's another crazy week for all of us. It always has been, always will be a crazy week for what we do. But had a fantastic time this past Wednesday hosting the Talent and Technology Symposium for PMI, which is available on demand. If you go to projectmanagement.com, you can register for it there, see all of the presentations that we did. Was proud to be the host, was happy to do that. And I was the main person bringing everything together in between the different speakers. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of stuff around AI, drones, the blockchains, all kinds of new technology. It was actually a little scary. The common theme was Skynet is true and that it's coming, but it was very, very interesting. I learned a tremendous amount just participating in that. So please go visit projectmanagement.com. And also on projectmanagement.com, we're happy to be hosting this show now. So our podcast can be found there, as well as rickamorris.com. And of course, always live every Friday on the Voice America Business Network. So we're going to go ahead and get into today's show because we got a lot to talk about. And I'm so happy to have a good friend of mine, Chris Rollins, is going to be on the show with us. And after his military career, he spent 16 years leading large sales and operational teams in his corporate career. But he and his wife, Melissa, founded the Rollins Performance Group, Incorporated. Now, they help others grow using their proprietary 3C model of high performance, which we're going to talk about today. And this model focuses on key elements of communication, connection, and conversion as the foundation to achieve consistent and sustainable growth. I happen to know him as a fellow John Maxwell team member and a certified DISC master trainer with Personality Insights. So let's welcome him to the show. Chris, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, Rick. Good to be with you and everyone today.
Good to be with you. I've got my high eye ready to go. So we're ready to walk out. Now, for most of our audience that listens to us every week, they're not new to DISC. We talk about DISC quite a bit and how I think the number one thing a project manager needs to do, and of course all managers and leaders, but me being in the project management industry, I always say the greatest thing that they need to focus on is growing their influence and understanding that in our career, we don't really have direct reports. So project managers, the project's not ours. The people that are on it don't report to us directly. And, we have no budget authority, yet we're supposed to be in full control of the project. And a lot of project managers get confused by that. And I say, no, it's all influence. So we want to talk influence. We want to talk DISC and the power of that because it's a tool I've been using probably 16, 17 years now. But boy, did the lid get blown off for me when I got a chance to really see it through Personality Insights and understand it the way you and everybody else teaches it that's been certified through there. So let's just jump into it because a lot of people will say DISC, DISC, it changes over time, or, I can make it come out to whatever I want it to be. So it's not valid. And how do you address some of those questions right out of the gate?
Well, first off, Rick, that's a great question about the validity of the assessment. In the scientific community, there's no self-assessment that is ever going to score 100% on a validity scale. The assessments are actually measured by a process called Cronbach's alpha, and that determines is an assessment accepted as scientifically valid. It has to achieve a coefficient of 0.7 or higher in order to be valid. The DISC assessments that we use range in the high, I think it's like 0.8755. So, they're way up there, right? Had a guy tell me one day, I asked him, I said, how good is that on the Cronbach's alpha scale? 0.8755. He said, that's off the freaking charts. But to your point about whether or not it's valid, it's interesting. People can absolutely answer an assessment, especially if they kind of know what they're looking for, and they could skew the results of that assessment. And here's what I often tell people. You're not making the assessment process invalid. You're just wasting yours. Because wow. I could take an assessment. I'll give you this one, Rick. I could take an assessment today and make myself a high S. and say, look, I'm a high S. You and everyone else that knows me. No, I'm glad you answered all those questions, but that's just a waste of paper. So,
yeah, and I think personal integrity comes into play as well, correct?
Well, yeah. So at the end of the day, it is about that. It's about understanding who you are. And I think one of the reasons sometimes that people do that is because they fail to recognize that there is not a good or a bad style. They might have seen a style that was operating out of control. And all of a sudden they thought, ooh, I don't want to be that style. Well, every style has under control and out of control characteristics. As long as we understand and recognize who we are and how we're wired, then we can appreciate our style. And actually, we go from a point of misunderstanding people to understanding people to, once we recognize those traits, to appreciating each of the different styles. And ultimately, our goal is to move to a point where we celebrate all the unique styles that people have. Now, when you mentioned about it being fairly consistent, who we are typically is pretty consistent. That's just how we're wired. Now, it's funny, I've had people challenge that with me in the past where they say, I can take the assessment and it varies a little bit one way or another. And there is truth to that statement. So that was a great point you brought up. In fact, I often will have people go in, even in training classes, we go to the advanced class, I will have them retake an assessment for the exact purpose of showing them it might not be exactly the same. But what happens is when you have nearly 20,000 potential plotting points on a graph, it might move a little bit. And maybe one letter shifts or it changes. But when you show the overall graph, what I do is I'll actually put dots up to say, here was your last one, here was this one. It might have switched, and some people would panic, if you will, if two letters swap. Say I'm a DI and they say, oh my gosh, I took the assessment. I'm an ID, right? They're right here. If I'm on a graph, it's not like I went from here to there. I'm never going to be at the bottom of the graph. I'm going to be at the top. So while they might shift, the shifts are slight. And I do say, yes, anything could impact how we took an assessment on a day, right? Maybe we were sick, not speaking that over anyone, but just dealing with stress in our life, situations, things happening on the job. Not that there's ever in the project management world any high demands placed on you, right? Sure. They just might impact that. But those things would be done. So you really just want to look at saying, in a perfect world, if I didn't have to adapt myself to anyone else, I mean, this would be my state of euphoria, right? If everyone adapted to me, this would just be me on cruise control in my natural state. And that doesn't excuse us from doing the other things, but what it does is helps us to recognize the areas that when we are naturally operating in them, it's actually recharging us. It's almost like you with your phone on charge versus me if my phone wasn't on charge. We can both do the identical steps. You are actually getting juiced up. I'm getting worn down. And when we're done, you're revved up and ready to go. And I'm saying, I got to go find an outlet and get some juice in my battery.
Yeah. Yeah. Being a high I, that was one of the biggest things I had to learn was, I work in my home office. And so if I'm not traveling for a client, then I'm secluded and not around people. Mm-hmm. And so I'll feel myself get drained and immediately pick up the phone and call somebody, anybody who will be willing to talk to me, but we'll call somebody and recharge that battery. So my creative juices flow, everything else starts to flow when we do that. One point though, I think is really important. It's something that I point out as well, is that there's multiple versions of DISC that's out there. In the sense that there's, the Wiley version, which only asks you the one, set of questions. And then we've got our version that we subscribe to, which is, the best and the least, or what do you most feel like and what do you least feel like? Describe why that's different and why we do that.
Well, that's good that you brought that up. When you think about the most and least, the best way I've described this to people, when we ask someone what they prefer most, we move them toward their environmental trait. And what our environmental trait is number one, it's definitely a much more flexible trait. And it's a trait that we can adapt to. Again, not being high in any trait doesn't excuse us from going there. We just have to manage the energy. But But an environmental trait is somewhere where we've learned to adapt. I don't always want to say home and work because I've actually seen people in their environmental trait at home when home was not the best environment, whatever, right? And maybe they said, I'm myself at work. Okay. But that's driven by the most question. The least answer is typically far more consistent. I'll give you an example of this, Rick, that I think everyone could resonate with. If I were to ask you this question, what is your favorite meal? And we can go out to dinner tonight and you can get anything you want. What would you like? Your favorite dish?
Yep. So for me, it's going to change. It could be chicken, could be steak,
Well, hold on,
it could be whatever.
Give me your favorite one first. Let's try this.
Favorite one would be steak.
You love steak. So you'd have steak for dinner if we went out tonight.
Yep.
Cool. How about lunch tomorrow?
Probably not.
Now, see, it's funny that you changed that quick. And I know, but you think about it. I actually will have people say, yes, yet. Well, maybe not. Right.
Right.
So then if I flip the question and I said, what is that gross, disgusting? Oh my gosh. I think I feel a call to a 40-day fast before I have to eat this. Right. What is that thing you just despise?
Sushi. Not doing it.
I'm with you. Right. Okay. So would you like sushi for dinner?
Absolutely not.
Lunch tomorrow.
Never.
Dinner tomorrow. So you see what happens is eventually we can all do the thing we like the least if we have to, right? That's adapting. But it's something that's so much more consistent. The food analogy is the best example I've ever used, where people say, even the thing I love the most, too much of a good thing is I need a little variety. Those things we dislike the most typically are much deeper rooted in the core of who we are. And they keep us very consistent, with saying this is going to be slowed a little to ever experience change. And that's why.
And didn't mean to step on you there, but that's exactly why the most and the least. And I've heard it explained that way. And it resonated with me so much, especially for anybody that says, DISC changes often. Yep, your behavioral one changes. But if you're not tracking the one that really is who you are, for instance, I'm an ID, but I get drained in the D. And it's because, when I have to get onto my kids and turn into that, taskmaster, it drains me. I have no energy. But when we're having fun and goofing off and doing fun things, then, I'm getting juiced up as well. So we're going to take our first break right here. We'll be right back with Chris Rollins of the Rollins Performance Group. We'll be right back after this break. And we're back to the Work-Life Balance with Rick Morris. We're visiting with Chris Rollins today, talking all about DISC. I did say, most of the audience does know DISC, but for those that may be just tuning in for the first time, just go ahead and give us a quick categorization of DISC, what each one of the letters means for us.
Well, DISC, let me start by saying DISC is what we refer to as the model of human behavior, right? It's something that Dr. William Marston developed in the 1920s, and it really just measures why people behave the way they do. The fact that most people do exhibit predictable patterns of behavior. And so Dr. Marston basically put them into 4 quadrants. And each letter in the quadrant makes up the word DISC. It's one of the things that makes it memorable. But the D is often referred to as dominant. And I actually use the word driven very often, Rick. I'll tell you that.
I like that. Yeah.
I actually prefer the word driven and speak to many Ds who look at yes, we're driven to get results. To us, being a high D, it's a more positive term. For the I, it's inspiring. So definitely, outgoing and people-oriented individuals. The S is what we call supportive, the largest population group on the planet, something that people definitely need to be aware of. And the C is cautious. So they're the ones that, they're reserved and task-oriented and want to make sure that, that measure twice, cut once, I guess, if you will. I often say this about the C. I get the board cut much faster. They're usually not running back to the home store to grab another board because they got it right the first time.
That's right. I'm going to pivot for a second there because one of the biggest aha moments for me in merging DISC with project management was that the largest population group is the supportive type, which do not like to have unnecessary change is the way I say it. I don't like to say they don't like change. They'll change, but they have to know why. They have to understand it, and they have to process it in order for them to do that. Well, for project managers, almost everything we do every day is initiating change. And so there's a common kind of rub there from any of your stakeholders to also what you're doing from a project perspective. And that was just such a huge aha for me.
Well, I think, Rick, one of the reasons that they think that way, and it's a good thing for project managers to consider, because you're right, that whole role is about initiating change. But so people often will say that about that S, that supportive style. They don't like change. It's not that they don't like change. They don't like change for the sake of change. So that's one reason they embrace the status quo, right? Because to them, the status quo is, think of a great word, safe. And to the S, this is the one thing I've learned over time. So oftentimes people will get frustrated with that S, right? When they feel like they're balking at the change. Their focus so often isn't even on themselves. It's what's the potential risk? How is this going to potentially negatively impact so many other people, because they are so others focused. It's an amazing strength when you use it the right way.
Yeah. And you have to say it slowly when you say if somebody is an A or
an S.
Yeah, I got it. Because that can come out completely wrong if you speak quickly like I do. And so really at the crux of it as well, and where the largest sources of conflict are, is between what we call task-oriented and people-oriented, which is kind of half the circle, right?
Yes.
So why don't you describe that for the audience?
Well, I'll describe it. Let me start, since you brought it up, by explaining why it is a source of so much conflict. We typically say that roughly about 90% of conflict comes between task and people-oriented. So if we think about that, about 10% of conflict comes between someone's motor of activity, their pace, whether they're outgoing or whether they're reserved. And it's interesting when you think about why is that. One of the things is this: we can quickly identify someone's pace. It is very observable to the natural eye, especially when you know what to look for, without even needing to talk to someone. It's how quickly they walk in a room. I mean, just their pace, right? How they talk. So many things that are there. But the compass of activity, if you will, the difference between task and people, is often an internal driver that we have to figure out. And since it's not as easy to recognize as the other, it can cause more conflict. But so I think that there's a big confusion in the world. I hear this often, and as a primary D, I'm a DI. So you're an ID, I'm a DI. We're actually very close on the scale. But as a DI, I'm still more task-driven than I am people-oriented. And I had someone say this to me one day, Rick, years ago, that just lit me up. Well, that's because you're a D. You don't like people, right? Oh. And I'm going to tell you this, Rick. It was an I that said that to me, right? Yeah. And I said, whoa, time out. You're an I. You don't have the right to tell me who I do and don't like. and when you see the conflict, right? But there's this big misperception that task-oriented people or individuals that predominantly are D or C, which are both task-driven traits, well, they don't like people. And I'll say this: it's also just as much misperceived that just because someone is quote unquote people-oriented, that they do like people. I know that almost sounds,
because I'm a high I and I don't like anybody, so it's good. I'm just teasing. Go ahead.
But when you think about it, right? So I often say that one of the differences between task and people, when someone says, "How do I know?" Number one, you've got to understand that there is not a right or wrong. And when you don't explain the difference, I find a lot of times that people will say, "Gee, I probably should be people-oriented because if I say task, I'm a jerk." I mean, you see how that could come across, right?
Absolutely.
So I always say, every time I get 30,000 feet in an airplane, thank God for the high C engineer, right? Yes. Every time I drive over a bridge, Rick, I like you, but I don't want you designing the bridge, right? You're the high I, you're the mechanic, the high I that says, well, they always give us extra parts. And the task-oriented says, no, that part goes somewhere, right? Yeah. So the difference is people will say, well, how do I know? How do I know which one I am? And the easy example I'll give is this. When you lay in bed at night, a task-oriented person, this goes through our mind. What did I get accomplished today? Did everything on my checklist get done today? What's the first thing I've got to do when I get up in the morning, right? I've got to get this done. This is on my list for tomorrow. Notice what our focus is on, right? Yep. Again, doesn't make us bad people, but it's just, this is our focus is on the task at hand. And by the way, we use the task to take care of people. That is an important thing for people that are people-oriented, dealing with a task-oriented person to understand. We're still taking care of people. We're just doing it our way. And we're using the task to do that. So if I flipped.
Your task is, I need to motivate somebody today. Right? So I'm going to schedule 30 minutes with Chris to motivate him. Right? I mean, that's and it's on the to-do list, right? That's essentially it.
Okay, so prime example, right? The world we live in today, at the end of the day, Facebook, right? I got to go wish happy birthday. Oh, it was Rick's birthday today. Happy birthday, happy birthday. And at the end of the day, it was still that task. But the task-oriented person will say, well, if I didn't wish them happy birthday today, they still got a year older. It's okay. Now, a people-oriented individual will lay in bed at night. They don't think what got done today. What's the first thing I got to get done tomorrow, right? They'll think something like this. Oh my gosh, I got to talk to this person today. I got to talk to that person today. Who did I see today? Who saw me today? Had a little bit of fun on that one. But, it's really about that. In fact, my wife, being a high eye, as you know, would lay in bed and say, oh my gosh, it's 11:30. I didn't wish all these people happy birthday on Facebook. And she'll reach over and grab her phone off the nightstand and start wishing happy birthday because she doesn't want to hurt anyone's feelings because she loves people. And it's all about the people. And the task guy in me says, they're still a year older. That's okay. It's the difference between the two. But when people don't understand what draws somebody, that's where, they try to approach, or as we'll often say, they try to approach, if we consider task on the left of the model and people on the right, they try to approach people the wrong way. And I think the biggest thing we can do to help people reduce conflict is understand a term we use called approaching the world from right to left. When you approach a group of individuals from people-oriented to task, as John Maxwell said one time about walking through the office and saying, walking right by the people. And the guy said, I had to get busy getting to work. John said, you just walk right by all your work, right? When we approach people first, hi, how are you, Rick? How are you doing today? Hope you had a great day. Yes, we can get to the task. But when we approach people, and by the way, a task-oriented person does not mind the short formality. Don't write us a novel, but they don't mind the short, the hi, how you doing? But when we go straight to the task, I need this done, this done, this done, we wonder why the employee morale goes so far down because people think, God, they're such a jerk, right? It doesn't take long at all. And I've had people, I don't have time for that. Well, you don't have time not to do that because 2/3 of the planet is people-oriented. Note to teach every task-oriented person listening, right? 2/3 of the planet are people-oriented. Always approach right to left, and you can connect to everyone. When you approach left to right, you'll connect to the third that think like you, and the other 2/3 will immediately be disassociated because they felt conflict there.
Yeah, and on that point, we've got 2 minutes before break, but one of the best things that I had heard from Dr. Rome as well, especially when I'm speaking. So for those people that are speakers out there, that kind of stuff, is what did you think? How did you feel? Right. And so that the right on the right side, we feel our way into a decision. And on the left side, you think your way into a decision. And just, again, understanding that basic component can take away a tremendous amount of conflict, or at least misunderstandings.
Well, yes, it can. To your point there about feeling and thinking, we were talking about it prior to the show in the world of cells, right? I said there's a big misperception, a truth that I often hear taught as the truth that says the cell is made emotionally and justified logically. That is correct for 2/3 of the population. It's not correct for the other third, though. That third does not make my third, if you will, because I can put myself in that bucket. We do not make the decision emotionally and justify it logically. We make the decision logically, and then it's the right next step, and we move on. And to your point about learning to speak to an audience, it's not, well, which one do I do? You address both to speak the language of your entire audience rather than pigeonholing yourself into only connecting with a portion.
Yeah, one of the things I like to do in a workshop, and I think it's fun to do with the team anyway, is tell me your process on how to buy a car.
Right.
Right. And which car are you going to buy? Right. And the disc comes way out in that, right? The C's
Absolutely.
have visited it, 11 times and test drove it 6 times. The I's said, today I'm getting a car, and whatever one, floats your boat, that's what we're going to go get. And we don't even worry about payments until later. We're like, golly, that's a lot, right? So I know this.
Thought about that earlier.
Yeah. Well, what are you going to do? So we're going to take another break right here. We're going to be right back with Chris Rollins. You're listening to Rick Morris on the Work-Life Balance. And we're back for the third segment of the Work-Life Balance this week. And as always, you can hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Rick A. Morris. You can find us via rickamorris.com or rsquaredconsulting.com. Always looking for feedback. And if you think you would make a fantastic guest yourself, please reach out to us. There's a form out there to let us know about you. So coming back with Chris Rollins. So Chris, as we get into more of DISC, and we can talk about DISC like crazy for hours, you and me. But one of the things that I think is really important to understand is when we're getting into DISC itself, right? We've talked about the brands in the marketplace, but one of my favorite stories of hearing from Dr. Rome, and I know you've got tons of them as well, was when he worked with the baseball team. Yep. And he worked I can't remember off the top of my head. Diamondbacks, right? And they said, what kind of people did you want on the team? They said all high Ds, which was a cool thing. But when you're getting into teams and understanding DISC, why is it so effective for not only a manager but team members to understand each other's profiles?
Well, first and foremost, if you think about it, when you understand someone else's profile, what you're able to do is learn to adapt and speak to them in a way they need to be spoken to. It's not that, and sometimes they'll say, I don't have time to deal with that, right? That's just being needy. It's not needy. It's speaking their language. You can speak a language that someone understands and you reach them in their head, right? Intellectually. But when you speak their language, you reach their heart. You actually touch them at the core of who they are. And so when you learn to speak the different styles, recognize the styles, know the styles of your team, and then can adjust, you increase employee morale, employee engagement goes through the roof, turnover goes down, right? Which we always say, well taken care of employees always equals well taken care of customers. So now your CSI or NPS, whatever version of that you use, ends up going up. Your sales goes up. It's funny that all of those things are highly measurable. It's one of the reasons that I just get set off on a tangent every when someone tells me, Chris, that's a soft skill. So really, what's the number one reason you have to turn over people? Well, because they can't get along with anybody. All right, well, if it's a soft skill, explain to me why it's so dadgum hard, right? And it is very, very measurable by so many of the KPIs that we use in an organization today. We can improve that, we can improve that, we can improve that simply by learning to recognize and adjust and adapt. I've seen companies do everything from literally put the dots on their hard hats, right? I was so impressed. You talk about a culture. This is who I'm talking to their graphs hanging up on the outside of their door when you're walking into an office. This is who you're speaking with. I know people that put them in their email signatures. I mean, it's just so many different things that you do that helps people say it becomes part of a culture. And what we're doing is we're learning to speak. This is what I often say. There are over 6,000 languages spoken in the world today. If I can teach you to speak 4, you can connect to any human being on the planet. That's why it's so powerful.
That's well said. A personal story for me, I remember managing a team. It was the first time I really had direct reports. Again, being a project manager, nobody ever really reported directly to me. And in the beginning, everything was great. But of course, I'm a high I. Right. So once we started to settle in, then there was a lot of idiosyncrasies that I did as part of my personality that were bothering them. And of course, that was turning into bigger items. And I asked them to write down kind of everything they didn't like about, what I did. And that was something I was going to improve. And in the feedback that I got back, almost every single thing I could improve that day, meaning I just wasn't aware that when I said this to this person, I wasn't speaking their language. So I'll give you an example of that. I had a very, very high I person who was working for me. I'd say, write an email and please say ABC, right? Well, anything I said after please say ABC, he was like, dude, I'm a creative person. I don't need to be told how to write an email, right? So that was demoralizing to him. To me, it's like, that's really easy to change, to say, hey, when I talk to that person, just tell them what I want, they'll go create it, right? And so when I started to look back after I'd been, certified through DISC and really did my deep dives, I could see every one of those was a personality communication flaw that I had put in of me just coming from my eye and them trying to absorb that.
I think one of the great things that I picked up on that you just said there, though, when you talk about how it's so powerful, is that you said, I can change it that day, right?
Yeah.
It's all about adjusting and adapting and changing how we communicate and connect with others, yet at the same time, when it's done properly. And I want to say when it's done properly, because Lord knows I've seen people, try to change people or have one style in the room feel demoralized, which is the worst thing you could ever do. At the same time, you could change those things that day, but the internal wiring of who you are is who you are. We're never trying to change an individual at the core of who they are. We just want them to understand themselves better and to understand others better and to be able to connect at a higher level.
And so to sum that up, I think it's awareness, right? I think that's the word you really drive home, is to just simply, because I've seen, several people go, well, that's just the way I am. People have to deal with it. And I was like, well, yeah, they're dealing with it by not working for you, or they're dealing with it by, telling you off, right? That's how they're dealing with that. But I think that awareness creation, because again, most of the things that were on that list were little idiosyncrasies that I did to everybody. It just, this one ticked that person off. This one ticked that person off. And I just said, I can stop doing that. It's really easy. Right. But yeah, it's mind blowing that, that people though will be afraid sometimes. Talk about that. Organizations or cultures that are afraid for you to come in and do DISC. What do you think of that?
The only time you really see someone that comes in and they're afraid for you to come in and do it is because they're dead set that, yeah, everyone needs to adjust to me, right? Or they just don't want to adapt and don't want to change. There's truly nothing to fear in a process where you want to get better and you want to understand others. The thing that I like to keep in mind when I remind people is that every trait exhibits certain characteristics, what we call under control or what we can call out of control, right? And so when we come into an organization, first and foremost, we start with an assessment process, helps us understand the model that we're dealing with, and then we train across the model. What we're not doing is changing their process. We're not changing everything else. And really, we can't change their culture. They have to want to change their culture. But if they want an environment that, again, just creates better engagement, better communication, reduces conflict across departments, not that anyone ever has that, right? Or any of that, then there's really nothing to fear with this process. If they take it, learn it. The beautiful thing about DISC is that the model is so applicable. It's not complex. It's not so academic that you have to go study it for a year to understand something. You can learn it, lead, and immediately apply it. And when you immediately apply it, you can very quickly see the results from it, which again, can remove all the fear, if you will, or concern that someone has, about coming in and doing that. The worst thing someone can do is come in, learn about all the styles, and do what you just said a minute ago. Okay, got it. Y'all all understand me now. Deal with me. Yeah, that's not the right answer. But again, it's being open and just being adaptable, being aware of the things, as you said. A saying that we say often: you can't be aware of something till your first day aware of it. And then just being able to use that to increase your results across the board.
So you and I have talked about being certified. How does someone go about getting certified in DISC? What can they do? Where can they go? Who can they find?
Well, obviously, to that point, there's going to be a number of different people. There's probably a lot across the U.S., if you will, that work with DISC. With Personality Insights, what we do that truly stands apart, if you will. And I would say there's three things with Personality Insights to me that hands down make Personality Insights different from anyone else. Starts first and foremost with the training process. It's the reason we do in-person 2 full-day trainings, right? This isn't a 3-hour webinar, which nobody here wants to admit. Most of us multitask during. And we're doing half of something else. Hey. But so you're in person, you're in class for 2 solid days, really going through the model. And when we train on the model, We're training on the model. We're not bringing someone in a class for 2 days, because I've actually done this. I've taken people through our certification process who were previously certified somewhere else. And I said, why are you coming here? And they said, well, I don't have, this, and I don't have that, and I really wasn't trained. I said, well, didn't you go somewhere to a 2-day, or a 3-day class or whatever? If they were someone that did it live. And they said, yeah. I said, well, what'd you learn? They said, well, they spent about an hour talking about DISC and the rest of the time on how to sell assessments. Oh, Lord, right? Oh, so you're a glorified affiliate. Essentially, you've got to know the training process. Otherwise, you're going to take something that is intended to help people. You're not going to understand it, and you're going to hurt people with it. I see trainers over and over again that walk in, like I said, try to change the group. They try to label them. They try to pigeonhole them. And so many times when I work with an organization that says, we've already done some of the basics of DISC, can you get the advanced stuff? I said, oh, you've already been trained in DISC? Yes. Okay, I'm starting with the basics. Well, no, we told you we've already been trained. I know. Now I got to go fix all the last junk. Right?
Yeah.
So training is
undo it.
Right. So training is number one. Curriculum is number two. We've got over 25 curriculums that are each developed. Some of them are half day up to a full day to use for workshops for different specific categories, whether it was just understanding someone else, speaking, presenting, leading, selling, conflict resolution, teamwork, et cetera. All these different things, having the curriculum developed is key. And yes, assessments are important, because while there are a lot, and I want to be clear about this because we're definitely not the only one, there are good assessments in the marketplace. Now, I'm an assessment junkie. I take a bunch of them. There are some very good assessments out there. Any assessment you've got to make sure has truly been validated, as I talked about the validation process earlier. Unfortunately, there are some people out there that have assessments that, hey, I think I sat down in my study tonight and created an assessment and started selling it tomorrow. It hasn't been studied or validated. I don't know that I'd want to be using those, right? Because you don't know that they're accurate. So understanding the training, the curriculum, and the assessment process. I know this, our training process, I'll put up against anyone as being second to none. Obviously, the things we do that are a little bit unique, is hosting them in small group events, doing the private community for our trainers after the fact. And then, as you know, I do live weekly teaching calls every week for our trainers to help them continue to learn, because I don't want the learning to be over just because they finished a 2-day session. But, going through that training process, when it comes to the curriculum that's developed, I'll tell you this, there's no one even close to what we have pre-developed. Dr. Rome spent 35 years creating that. I've created quite a bit of DISC curriculum of my own over the years, but he's got almost a 30-year jump on me. So
Sure.
That's a lot of curriculum.
And so, and your website is what? RollinsPerformanceGroup.com, correct?
Yeah, RollinsPerformanceGroup.com, right.
So if you're interested in finding out how to become certified yourself, you can certainly reach out to RollinsPerformanceGroup.com. And find out where they're going to be doing some trainings, possibly in your area, or they'll certainly come to your area if there's enough need. But we're going to take our final break right here, and we'll be right back on the Work-Life Balance Curriculum. Okay, so we're back, so we didn't pick up that we were back at all. We didn't hear any music or anything. So sorry for the personal chat there. We'll get that edited up for our podcast. But for our live audience, welcome to a live broadcast. That's what happens. So I was sitting there going, the break is exceedingly long here. We're just chatting, but maybe I should have been, my hi. I just wanted to check on you, your wife, on personal things. So anyway, so coming back, Chris, tell people how to get in touch with you and what classes are coming up.
All right, well, they can reach us directly at RollinsPerformanceGroup.com. Of course, they can connect with me at Twitter, the Chris Rollins, LinkedIn, obviously, is which is my biggest platform. Or whatever. But if they go to the site at RollinsPerformanceGroup.com, there is one of the buttons right on the main page. It talks about our upcoming schedule. We've got the schedule that's posted for the remainder of the year currently up on the site. We actually have a Dallas class next month in July that's full at this point, but we've got August, the first part of August, 2nd and 3rd in Orlando, Florida. We will be in Chicago, Illinois on October 15th and 16th. And then back down in Atlanta on November 5th and 6th to finish out the year. Our schedule through Q1, at least through March of next year, will probably be posted within the next 7 to 10 days once we finalize the contracts with the training facilities.
Outstanding. And so the quote that we ask everybody on the show, what's some of the best advice you've ever received?
Rick, probably one of the, if I think of the first thing that comes to mind when someone says the best advice I ever received, it's interesting because this has fit multiple aspects of my life, right? There is strength in being independent, but there's weakness when you try to do things alone. And I think about that, and I'm reminded because, as you even know, obviously, as we're both part of the John Maxwell team, right? It's so interesting when people say, hey, I get out and do this. And when I say there's a difference between being independent or being alone, I see so many people that step out as entrepreneurs in the business world, right? I've worked for so-and-so for so long, and I know how to do whatever their widget is that they're doing. I think I can do this on my own. And if you want to know why 90% of businesses fell in the first 3 years, it wasn't that they didn't know what they were doing. It's the last part of what they just said there. I think I can do this on my own. When I was in the Army, I was a tank commander. So, one of the things that we would always talk about, and I'll date myself going way back to the 80s and 90s when I was in the military, but, was that somebody like Rambo looked really good on a Hollywood screen, right? Got them, M60 or whatever on his hip, and he's just, blazing, guns blazing, whatever. Look, we all looked at that and said, okay, that guy's dead in 60 seconds in a real battlefield. We are the greatest fighting force on the planet because we fight as a unit. That's what we do. We have to have each other's back. So when we understand being independent, we think about our marriage is the same way, right? We're independent in that aspect, but neither one of us are alone. And in business, embrace the strengths of our independent, unique skills and qualities, but don't get out there and try and do it alone. John's made a statement that we both probably know very, very well. One's too small a number to achieve greatness, right? Yeah. I don't know that I've ever put those two together, but they really fit together. You can be independent, but that is not the same as being alone. That's probably one of the strongest things I've ever heard that's fit me from my military career to my business today.
Absolutely. I love it. I appreciate that. So any final words for our audience?
I think just the biggest thing that I would remind people, actually, I often share this. So it's something that Harvard Business Review shared when they said the number one criteria for advancement and promotion for professionals is an ability to communicate effectively. And so there's a huge difference in learning to talk and learning to communicate. Learn to communicate, to connect with your audience. It will help drive influence as you open the session with talking about influence, which ultimately will drive impact and results and income. That's what I believe in with.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being a part of the show. We've had a great time having you along with us and look forward to seeing you again. And I know I'll be seeing you shortly, right? In August, we'll be with each other. And anybody who's interested in joining the John Maxwell team, being with Chris and I in Orlando, you can certainly reach out to Rick A. Morris or rmorris@rsquareconsulting.com. Happy to answer any of the questions that you have about the John Maxwell team or joining this fantastic organization as well. Coming up on the show, speaking of John Maxwell team, we've got a couple of team members that are going to be coming up on the show. Next Friday, we're going to have Marie Cosgrove. Marie actually shares the stage with Les Brown, and she is a powerhouse, feisty little powerhouse, and she's a lot of fun, but an incredible story that you're not going to want to miss. I mean, she's had an incredible run, incredible story, but is such an inspiration to many of us. And then after that, we're going to have James Harrington. He's also a John Maxwell team member, but he heads up the Ugandan Water Project. So it's going to be really in depth about not only project management, but an incredible charity that's bringing clean water to much needed areas. And James is a phenomenal person. So we've got some really, really good shows coming up. We look forward to sharing them with you every Friday right here on the Voice America Business Network. You've been listening to Rick Morris with the Work-Life Balance, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for joining us this week. The Work-Life Balance with Rick Morris can be heard live every Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific Time and 5 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Business Channel. Now that the weekend is here, it's time to rethink your priorities and enjoy it. We'll see you on our next show.